Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pools. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. Daniel stood at the gates of the great capital, his boots heavy with dust from the long road. He had traveled through silent valleys and high bridges to reach this place, yet his heart carried more weight than his pack. The summons he had received was clear and direct. The Queen herself demanded his presence, though no reason had been written. He had fixed machines, healed broken engines, and flown across dangerous skies, but never before had royalty spoken his name. The guards looked at him with suspicion as they opened the iron doors. He walked past them, his eyes moving over the tall stone walls and the banners that swayed above. This kingdom was not like the others he had seen. Its power was strong, yet there was sorrow in the air. The people outside had whispered about the Queen's sadness, though no one dared speak of it loudly. Inside the great hall, the silence pressed upon him. Torches lined the walls, their flames dancing across polished marble. At the end of the hall stood Queen Eleanor. Her crown shimmered, but her face was not filled with pride. Instead, it carried a shadow of grief. When her eyes met his, Daniel felt as though the air around him had stilled. She did not speak at once. Instead, she walked down the steps with slow, heavy grace, as though each step cost her strength. When she stood close enough that her voice reached him clearly, she finally spoke the words that would remain in his mind forever. "Human, my daughter requires you." Daniel's breath caught. He had been called many things in his life: pilot, wanderer, worker, dreamer, but never had he heard such words from a queen. He waited, certain more would be said, but silence hung after her plea. Her hands trembled slightly, though her voice had been steady. For the first time, Daniel saw not only a ruler, but a mother. "Your Majesty," he said slowly, "I do not understand. I am no healer of noble kind. Why call to me when you have all the wise men of your court?" Her eyes grew sharp, yet full of pain. "Because they have failed me, because none of them could save her. And because you are not like them." Daniel's heart pounded. He wished to ask why she thought him different. Why she placed such hope in a man who carried only tools and memory of the stars. Yet something in her tone struck him. It was not command. It was not the order of a queen who ruled over thousands. It was a plea, bare and human. He felt the weight of the hall press harder upon him. Each torch seemed brighter, each shadow deeper. "I die." He could not find words quickly, so he lowered his head and thought. Was this truly his place? To step into the pain of kings and queens, when his own life had been simple? He had no throne, no crown, no duty, except the road he walked. Still, he looked up again. The Queen's eyes did not release him. They held him as if binding him to fate itself. "Then let me see her," he said at last. "If I am to help, I must know what darkness has touched her." The Queen's breath left her in relief, though her face remained calm. She turned and motioned to her guard. With a gesture, she led Daniel through the back of the hall into a smaller passage. The walls grew narrow, the light dimmer, until they reached a quiet chamber, guarded by silence. Inside lay Princess Claire. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, but even in weakness, her eyes held gentle light. Daniel froze, struck by her presence. She was young, yet her strength seemed hidden behind the illness that bound her. She turned her head slowly, her lips parting in a faint smile when she saw him. "You are the one my mother spoke of," she whispered. Her voice was weak but kind. "I thank you for coming." Daniel did not know what to answer. He had faced storms, fire, and the vast cold of the sky, yet nothing had prepared him for this moment. The Queen watched him from behind, her face filled with hope and fear all at once. He felt his hands tighten at his sides, knowing his choice would decide far more than his own fate. He stepped closer to the princess, his heart steady now. Whatever path lay ahead, he knew there was no turning away. The Queen's plea was no longer just words. It was a bond that had tied his destiny to theirs. Daniel stood at the side of the bed, his eyes fixed on Princess Claire. Her face was calm, though it carried the shadow of weakness. She smiled faintly, but it was clear her strength was fading. He turned slightly toward Queen Eleanor, who waited near the door, her hands folded as if holding herself together. Her crown glittered in the dim light, but Daniel could see that she was not a ruler in that moment. She was a mother, afraid of losing her child. Daniel drew in a slow breath before speaking. His voice was steady, though his mind was filled with questions. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning." The queen stepped forward, her eyes heavy with memory. She explained that Claire had fallen ill after an experiment that the scholars of the court had attempted. They had tried to draw power from a hidden source, a kind of energy long forbidden. It had promised great strength for the kingdom, but something had gone wrong. When the machine failed, a wave of strange force struck Claire, who had been near. Since that day, her body had grown weaker, and no cure had worked. Daniel listened closely, his thoughts racing. He had heard of such forces before, whispers from old travelers and broken records from past ages. Few dared to touch them, for they brought more ruin than hope. Looked again at Claire, who now rested her eyes but still listened to every word. It struck him how brave she was, even in her state. "No healer could find a way," Queen Eleanor said softly. "The wise men gave me nothing but false hope. Each day I see her fade. Cannot lose her, not when she is the light of this kingdom. That is why I turn to you." Daniel felt the weight of her words press against him. He was not a man of kingdoms or thrones. He had no place in halls of marble or golden crowns. Yet here he was, standing before a queen and her daughter. It's chosen not for his name, but for the chance that he might succeed where all others had failed. He stepped closer to the princess and spoke gently. "Do you feel pain, Claire?" She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze. "Not pain," she whispered. "Only a heaviness. As if my body is not my own. Some days, it is hard to breathe. Some days I feel nothing at all." Daniel nodded. Her words told him more than any record could. He knew this was no simple illness. The energy within her had disturbed the balance of her body, and unless it was set right, she would not last. He placed a hand on the edge of the bed, careful not to startle her. "I will try," he said. "I cannot promise, but I will not turn away." The queen closed her eyes, and Daniel thought he heard the faintest sigh of relief. Claire smiled again, though weakly, as if comforted by his presence. For a moment, the silence returned, filling the room with an almost sacred weight. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in a small chamber given to him. He laid his tools out on the table, their metal edges glinting in the firelight. Old devices he had carried from world to world, scraps of knowledge, and memories of machines he had once repaired. He turned them in his hands, wondering if any of them could serve a purpose here. His mind replayed the queen's words. Forbidden power. A failed machine. A princess touched by forces unseen. He thought of the many broken engines he had fixed, the storms he had flown through, and the strange lights he had once seen beyond the clouds. He told himself that this was not beyond him, that he had faced darkness before, yet doubt remained, sharp and unyielding. When the door opened, Daniel looked up quickly. It was Princess Claire, walking slowly, leaning on the arm of a servant. Her face was pale, but her eyes were alive. She asked the servant to leave her and stepped into the chamber. Daniel stood at once, surprised she had the strength. "I wanted to see you," she said quietly. "Everyone else looks at me with fear or pity, but you look at me as if I am still myself." Daniel did not know how to answer, but he bowed his head slightly. "You are still yourself, princess. No illness can take that away." Her lips curved in the smallest smile. "Then I believe you will help me. Not because you are bound to, but because you wish to." Daniel felt a warmth in his chest he had not expected. In that moment, he understood. This was not only about saving a life, it was about trust, about carrying the hope of a mother and the faith of a daughter. He knew he could not fail them. As the night grew deeper, Daniel sat again by his tools. His doubts remained, but his resolve was stronger. For the queen, for Claire, he would find a way, no matter the cost. Daniel spent the next morning walking through the gardens outside the royal chambers. The air was cool, and the sound of water from the fountains echoed softly around him. He needed quiet to think. The queen had told him everything about the failed experiment, and Claire had spoken of her weakness with honesty. Now it was left to him to find a path forward. His mind searched through memories of machines he had fixed, strange forces he had faced, and the ways he had once balanced broken systems. Perhaps her body was no different than a system out of balance, a machine disturbed by power it was never meant to hold. As he walked, He heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Claire moving slowly along the path, guided only by her will. She wore a simple dress, her hair loose, and though her steps were unsteady, her eyes were bright with determination. "You should be resting," Daniel said. "I rest too much," she answered. "If I stay in bed, I feel myself slipping away. When I walk, even if only a little, I feel alive." Daniel smiled faintly, though his heart ached to see her struggle. He offered his arm, and after a moment, she accepted it. Together they walked along the path, the flowers on either side swaying gently in the breeze. "Tell me of your travels," Claire asked after a while. "I have never left these walls. I want to know what the world beyond looks like." Daniel thought for a moment. Then he spoke of the high mountains he had crossed, where the air was thin, but the stars felt close enough to touch. He told her of rivers that cut through wide valleys, shining like silver in the sun. He spoke of storms he had faced in the skies, lightning striking so near that it lit his face brighter than day. Claire listened with wide eyes, her hand tightening on his arm, as if she could see it all through his words. "It sounds so free," she whispered. "I dream of walking without fear, of seeing those rivers and mountains with my own eyes." "One day you will," Daniel said firmly. "We will make sure of it." They walked until her strength gave out, and Daniel carried her gently back to her chamber. As he laid her down, Queen Eleanor entered. She watched them with careful eyes, her face unreadable, but Daniel saw the trace of hope hidden in her gaze. That evening, Daniel began his work in earnest. He set up his tools and studied the notes left by the scholars of the court. Their writings were filled with pride, but lacked care. They had sought power, not safety. And it was Claire who had paid the price. He began drawing his own plans, writing in plain words that even the queen herself could understand. His goal was simple: to draw the dangerous energy out of Claire's body without breaking her spirit. Days passed as Daniel worked. He spent hours with Claire, speaking with her, learning her strength and weakness, and each time he saw her, the bond between them grew. She trusted him in a way that few ever had. He was not a court scholar or a nobleman. He was a man who listened and cared, but not everyone in the court welcomed him. Some whispered that he was an outsider, unworthy of the queen's trust. Others feared he would change the balance of power if he succeeded. Daniel noticed the stares, the quiet words spoken behind his back, but he ignored them. His task was too great to be distracted. One night, as he left the chamber, a nobleman stepped into his path. The man's robes were rich, his eyes sharp with suspicion. "You should leave before you cause more harm," the nobleman said. "The princess is beyond saving. Do not fill the queen with false hope." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "I did not come here to seek favor or power. I came because a mother asked me to help her daughter. I will not leave." The nobleman glared at him, then turned away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Daniel knew then that his task would not only test his skill, but also his will to stand against those who wished him gone. When he returned to Claire's side, she looked at him with quiet trust. "Do not listen to them," she said softly. "I believe in you, and sometimes belief is stronger than any cure." Daniel sat beside her, his hand resting on the table near hers. For a moment, the noise of the court and the weight of doubt fell away. He felt only the bond between them, strong and unshaken. As the night grew deep, Daniel whispered to himself, "I will not fail." And in his heart, he knew it was true. The morning sun rose over the capital, its light falling across the tall towers and the wide stone roads. Inside the royal chamber, silence hung heavy. Daniel stood beside his small device, every part of it checked and polished through the long night. The queen waited near her daughter's bed, her hands gripping each other so tightly that her knuckles were white. Princess Claire lay still, her eyes half closed, but when she saw Daniel, she gave him a faint smile. It was enough to give him strength. Daniel took a long breath. "Today we try," he said. "Whatever comes, I will stay by her side." The queen nodded, her face pale but steady. Guards stood at the doors, keeping watch for any who might dare to disturb them. The court had been divided. Some prayed for Daniel to succeed, while others whispered that he would fail. But in this room, there was only the queen, her daughter, and the man who had promised not to give up. Daniel placed the device on the table beside the bed. Surface gleamed with a faint light. powered by the fragments he had shaped into order. It was built not to harm, but to draw away the force that did not belong inside Claire. He lifted it gently, his hands firm, and spoke to her softly. "Claire, this will not be easy. You may feel fear, you may feel pain, but I will not leave you. If you trust me, we can face it together." She looked at him with clear eyes and whispered, "I am ready." Daniel set the device against her chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum filled the room. A glow spread across the device, reaching into her body. Claire gasped, her back arching as the hidden energy stirred. The queen stepped forward, but Daniel raised a hand to stop her. His eyes stayed fixed on the device. The glow grew brighter. Strange lines of light ran across Claire's skin, marking the path of the force that had lived inside her for so long. She cried out, her voice thin but strong. Daniel spoke steadily, his voice guiding her through the storm. "Stay with me. You are stronger than this. Breathe, Claire, not let it take you." Her breaths came fast, her hands gripping the sheets, but she kept her eyes on his. In that gaze was trust unbroken, faith that bound them both. The device shook in his hands, the glow threatening to break, but Daniel held it steady. Slowly the light began to shift. What had once bound her now flowed out, drawn into the device. The glow in her skin dimmed, replaced by the pale but natural color of life. At last, with a sharp sound, the device fell silent. The light within it dimmed to nothing. Daniel let it rest on the table, his arms shaking from the effort. He turned quickly to Claire. She lay still, her chest rising and falling with slow, steady breaths. For a terrible moment, no one moved. Then her eyes opened. Clear, bright, stronger than before. She drew in a deep breath and whispered, "I feel free." The queen let out a cry of joy and fell to her knees beside the bed, taking her daughter's hand. Tears ran down her face as she kissed Claire's fingers. "You are with me, my child. You are with me." Daniel stepped back, his chest heavy with relief. He had faced storms and broken machines, but nothing had ever weighed on him as this had. Yet now, as he looked at the princess sitting up with her mother's arms around her, he knew the struggle had been worth it. When the court gathered to see her, silence filled the hall. Claire walked slowly beside her mother, her steps steady, her head held high. Gasps spread among the nobles, some weeping, some bowing their heads in shame for doubting. The queen raised her voice so all could hear. "This man has given me back my daughter. He has done what none of you could. Remember his name, for he will not be forgotten." Daniel felt the weight of every eye upon him, but he did not seek their praise. His gaze was only for Claire, who smiled at him, her strength shining through. He bowed his head, knowing his path had changed forever. That night, as the city lit its fires in celebration, Daniel stood at the balcony beside Claire. The queen watched from within, her face filled with peace. Claire spoke softly, her voice strong at last. "You kept your word. You did not let me go." Daniel answered, his voice quiet but firm. "And I never will." The stars shone above them, clear and bright. The kingdom rejoiced, and in that moment, Daniel knew he had not only saved a life, he had become part of a story that would live for generations. A story of courage, trust, and the unbreakable bond between a mother, a daughter, and the man who had answered their plea. Thank you for watching and being part of our community. The days grew longer as Daniel worked to understand the power that had harmed Princess Claire. He studied the marks left on her body, the faint glow in her skin when the strange energy stirred, and the way her breathing shifted when the force grew heavy. Each detail guided him, though the path ahead was unclear. Still, he refused to give in to doubt. Each time Claire looked at him with trust, his resolve grew stronger, but whispers in the court grew louder. Many nobles feared Daniel's presence. They thought he would gain too much favor with the queen. They feared he would change the kingdom if he succeeded. Jealousy and pride filled their voices, and slowly their anger grew into a plan. Daniel sensed their eyes on him, but he remained focused on his work, even as the danger closed around him. One night, as Daniel prepared his notes, he heard hurried footsteps outside his chamber. The door opened and a loyal guard entered, his face pale with urgency. "You must come quickly," the guard said. "There is a plot against the princess. They mean to harm her before you can finish your work." Daniel rose at once, his heart racing. He followed the guard through narrow halls until they reached the princess's chamber. There, two men in dark cloaks tried to force the door. Before Daniel could think, he rushed forward, striking one aside with the strength of his arm. The guard drew his sword and held off the other until more soldiers arrived. The intruders were captured, but Daniel's hands shook with anger. He knew now that his work was not only about saving Claire's life, it was about fighting those who feared change more than they cared for their future. When the queen arrived, she looked at him with both gratitude and sorrow. "They will try again," Daniel said firmly. "If they cannot stop me with whispers, they will use blades." The queen nodded. "I will place more guards, but you must also be careful. They see you as a threat." Daniel looked toward Claire, who had been roused by the noise. Her face was pale with worry, but her eyes met his with strength. "Do not risk yourself for me," she said softly. "I already have," Daniel answered, "and I will again if needed." From that day, Daniel's work became a trial of fire. Each night he studied, each day he checked Claire's strength, and every hour he felt the eyes of those who wished him gone. Yet he pressed on, building a device from his tools and scraps he gathered from the royal stores. It was small, no larger than his hand, but its design was meant to draw the harmful energy from her body without harming her. It was risky, untested, and dangerous. But it was the only way. One evening, Queen Eleanor joined him as he worked. She watched his hands shape the device, her face caught between fear and hope. "You carry such a burden," she said. "Why do you not walk away?" "You owe us nothing." Daniel paused, setting the tool down. "Because your daughter looked at me and believed. Because you placed your trust in me when no one else did. And because some things are worth more than safety." The queen's eyes softened, and for a moment she seemed less like a ruler and more like a mother again. "Then may your strength be enough, for hers and for ours." As the final piece of the device clicked into place, Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Soon he would have to act. Soon he would place Claire's life in his hands, with no promise of success. He looked at the door, knowing beyond it enemies still whispered and plotted, waiting for him to fail. That night, Claire asked to see him once more. She sat on her bed, her hair loose over her shoulders, her face tired, but her smile steady. "You are risking more than I can give back," she said. Daniel shook his head. "This is not about what you can give. This is about what is right." She reached out a trembling hand, and for a moment Daniel hesitated before placing his hand near hers. Her fingers brushed his, and he felt the spark of warmth that no illness could steal. "Then I will trust you," she whispered. "With my life." Daniel nodded, his eyes steady. "I will not let you go." As he left her chamber, he knew the hour was near. The kingdom waited, the queen hoped, and the court plotted. Tomorrow would bring the final trial, the moment where his resolve would be tested beyond measure. And Daniel promised himself only one thing: he would not fail her.